Hi, and welcome to Gentle Essaying. I'm Sarah Einstein, and I'm going to be your guide through this workshop. I know about half of you, and I'm really excited to work with you again, and I'm excited to get to know the half of you whose work I haven't seen yet. We have a really amazing workshop this time. I'm pretty excited about who has signed up and the new people coming in. So this 4-week workshop is divided into 4 separate units, but the first 3 all follow the same pattern. For the first 3, there will be some readings, discussion of the readings, and then a prompt. And that essay prompt will focus on whatever craft element it was that we were looking at in the readings. For the first one, it's going to be, and now you can all laugh at me because I'm so bad at pronouncing this word, synecdoche. Synecdoche. I think that's right. It's close. I can spell it. And that's where one object or one small part of something stands in for the whole of that thing. We're going to be looking at a poem and an essay. In the poem, we're going to be listening to a poem Patricia Smith has where basically this picture of Emmett Till from Life magazine that Black parents hung in the house and carried in their wallets stands in for the entirety of the pressure that Black children feel not to be endangered, not to get themselves in danger, and the way in which society's use of danger, I guess I was trying to think of a nicer way to say it, but by putting Black children in peril, it gets translated into the ways that Black parents warn their children about that peril. And this one photograph from Life magazine is going to stand in for that as she talks about how it was in her life. The next piece is an essay by Jill Talbot, where a kitchen table is going to stand in for basically her history of relationship and mothering. And this kitchen table is going to be the object that follows her throughout various times and that becomes the focus of a lens, maybe just becomes the lens through which she examines this history. Both of these pieces are brief and pretty accessible. I encourage you to read the essay and listen to the poem a couple of times. I really wanted to let you hear Patricia Smith read that poem because I think it's so much more powerful in her voice rather than just on the page. And really think about how is this one object in each case being made to serve as the central lens through which larger issues are examined. What are those larger issues? How and why do these objects function so well in that role? Once you've had a chance to really pay attention to the readings and puzzle out what the writers are doing, I hope that you'll get started on your own draft. The more time that you have to put into this draft, I think the better the work that will come out of it. For this first essay, we're going to be focusing on the same craft skill. What object or part of something can you use to tell a larger story? This class is called Gentle Essaying, and I encourage people to take that to heart, right? So certainly we can write about very big things. But one of the things that now I'm going to do it again, synecdoche is so very good at is letting us look at these big things so closely, so narrowly, that we can absorb them, that it doesn't try to cover the entirety of something, and it doesn't try to overwhelm the reader with the weight or the poignancy of something. And I really encourage you to pay attention to how that functions, because it can be difficult or even impossible to convey to the reader the impact of something big if you also try to write it big. And here, look particularly at the Patricia Smith poem. How is it that she manages to talk about this huge central thing in the lives of Black children in the stretch of just one poem and still convey it so strongly? When you're looking for what your object or piece of something is going to be, I also encourage you not to focus on trauma. Those of you who've taken my workshop before have heard this spiel, but I just want to toss it out there again. Writing about trauma, if it is unresolved trauma, and the way that you know if trauma is unresolved is if it can still trigger symptoms in you. If instead of just, I'm thinking about this sad thing and it's making me feel sad, it is I'm thinking about this really frightening or terrifying thing, and my pulse is racing and I'm short of breath and I'm breaking into a sweat. When you can still re-experience the symptoms of trauma, chances are very good it's unresolved trauma. And the problem with writing about unresolved trauma is that the research shows that it can actually make that trauma more treatment resistant. I know this goes against a lot of the popular wisdom, which says write about something and you will feel better. And in fact, in the short term, people usually do feel better after they write about something. But that's because it takes the free-floating anxiety associated with unprocessed trauma and PTSD and attaches it to the correct stimulus. Over time, however, it just makes that stimulus connected to that memory more ingrained. So I want to encourage you, if you try to write about something difficult, to pay attention to how your body is reacting to the act of that writing and to back off from anything that makes you develop symptoms of trauma. That said, I want everyone to feel free to write about whatever they have to write about. And we're all going to read each other's works in an open and respectful way. A few things that I want to say about workshopping before we begin. The biggest one is about cultural competence in the workshop. This used to be a giant problem, and I think that most of us who are workshop leaders are addressing it now, and hopefully it's not as problematic as it once was. But there was this idea of the general reader. And the general reader was almost always white, middle class, probably Midwestern, and critiques would often go something like this. Here's one I got once writing about Passover at my family's house. I had included little snippets of Hebrew prayers. I didn't bother to translate words like haroset, matzah, to explain what they were. And in an early workshop, I had a lot of people in the workshop say, I don't think the general reader is going to know what that is. But I didn't want to spell it out for a non-Jewish audience who wasn't familiar with the terms, because that would have alienated my Jewish audience. And in truth, this essay was one that I was writing more for a Jewish audience. Many of us belong to specific cultural, ethnic, and religious groups. And to assume that we're not writing for those groups is problematic. So let's say that you are confronted with my essay. You would want to tell me where things were confusing because I had used specific information from my life that you couldn't follow. So if my Aunt Josie suddenly popped up and you hadn't seen her before and did something really important, you might say, I think we need Aunt Josie introduced before this. But you wouldn't want to say, I don't think the average reader is going to know what you mean when you say that it's time to hide the afikomen. You can assume that that's a piece of cultural knowledge and that even if you don't have that cultural knowledge, the reader who the essay is intended for probably does. Also, feel free to Google, right? As good readers, what we do when we encounter something from a writer that we are paying careful attention to is we go and find out what that thing is. Also, make note that people are going to be choosing how they write, what voice they write in. So I know that one of our writers writes intentionally in Black vernacular. Don't mistake that as somehow incorrect or wrong, right? That's an intentional writing choice. When I write, and particularly when I write my father, I sometimes use Appalachian vernacular. Clearly, I no longer speak with the accent I was born to, and I'm careful and judicious about not using it in ways that I would never use it in my own speech or in the speech of whoever I'm capturing. But don't assume that variances in usage and grammar and voice and tone are mistakes or wrong. If a writer's sustaining that through a piece rather than in a clause or a single sentence, then I think you can assume that it is intentional and you'll not want to try to police that. Finally, always be generous. Right? I come from the era where one of the first things that my mentor ever said to me about one of my essays was, there's probably a good idea here, but on the level of the line, this is complete shit. And I love him, and he really did a lot for my writing, but man, that broke my heart. And over the years, he got a little gentler. And I think we all agree now that what we really want to do is help writers build on their strengths, not harp on their weaknesses. And we all have writerly weaknesses. So as you're reading one another's works, don't look at it as though it's your job to pick it apart and find its flaws. Rather, Focus on the idea that it's your job to find where it's really doing a great job and point that out to the writer. We can get to suggestions for improvement, and we will. But first and foremost, you really want to focus on, here's the thing you do well, maybe even do more of it. I hope this has been helpful to you. I really look forward to working with you all this summer. And welcome to Gentle Essaying.